Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. I like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. Today, we're welcoming Alison from Water Camp, whose collection of 1950s fishing cabins on Torch Lake, Michigan, beautifully balances modern comfort with vintage charm. From her thoughtful perspective on embracing imperfection to her three core values of rest, connection, and exploration, Alison shares how authenticity and hospitality often means resisting the urge to make everything perfect. I don't know about you, but I needed to hear that right now. We're going to explore how she transformed 3 aging lakeside cottages into spaces that honor their historic roots while meeting modern expectations, and why sometimes the most memorable stays aren't about luxury, they're about character. For anyone questioning the balance between renovation and preservation, wondering how to build a business that aligns with their values, or seeking to create experiences that feel both polished and approachable, this conversation offers both practical insights and philosophical wisdom. We'll dive into everything from the financials of hosting to the importance of giving back, and why sometimes the hardest part of growth is knowing when to say no. Let's do it. I want to start our conversation with something that you said in your pre-interview. We're going to get into your history next, but I don't want this to get lost. And sometimes we get into conversation and I forget to come back to it. Okay. You were describing cabin culture and you said it draws us to places as beautiful as they are imperfect. Imperfection makes them approachable, familiar, and authentic. And I personally feel like this imperfection feels like it's missing from modern day cabin culture. So I would love for you to talk more about that and specifically how you've embraced that at Water Camp.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I've kind of pondered because I like things to look perfect and I am drawn to that like Scandinavian, like minimalist, modern, almost like untouchable look. I love that look in design, but I will say and given the cabins that we bought and renovated, there was so much imperfection in them. And I found over time that yes, like people want great design, but just as much they want that feeling of home and charm and character. And so it's like equal parts. So you have to kind of blend that. And I think holding on to the character of like any home is really important. And if you do build new, like how do you build character and imperfection into that? I think like there's something at the heart of every person that just wants to really connect and feel like there's an authentic experience. And that goes so far beyond. It's like the difference between staying in a chain hotel and a boutique hotel. It's that same idea. And so in the Airbnb space, like I think we do need to be mindful of that, especially as hosts, embracing the imperfections and almost like playing them up a little bit or like telling a story around that. When we were renovating our birch cottage, there was like a few aspects where I'm like, how do we cover this up? Like, how do we make this all better? Like, the bathroom or even the woodwork and the kitchen, like had these like kind of chintzy vintage, like, wavy, like knotty pine trim on the kitchen cabinets. And I'm like, how do we get rid of this? But then I'm like, you know what? This like makes the whole cabin. And so, to find that balance, find that blend and maintain a sense of character and charm. While still giving people like a modern experience too, because people do have really high standards. It's almost like they want both sides, like they want to have their cake and eat it too. So how do you find that balance?
And I think in the world of Instagram or marketing in general, where you're competing with more and more options, that perfection feels like it becomes more, you have like 5 photos to make an impression when someone's scrolling through Instagram. And so you want them to be perfect. How do you like show off the imperfection in a way that's endearing and approachable in 5 photos versus once you're actually there?
Yeah, totally. It's hard to blend it, but I do think it's possible. And I feel like in a lot of ways we stumbled upon that balance and we were like, oh, that means something to our guests. Like they love that. They love that feeling of almost like Mayberry, like stepping back in time. And so they try to put words to it and they try to describe it. And I was listening to like your interview with Isaac French and it really got my wheels turning because he was trying to like describe that it factor. And I totally connected with so much of what he was saying. I think there's something that people appreciate, like no matter who they are, but sometimes it takes, I don't know, it takes the right combination to actually achieve that.
Yeah.
Like how do you actually achieve that it factor? And sometimes we stumble upon it, or other times it's actually like engineered, or we actually think through it as hosts.
Yeah, and I think that's a really tricky balance of knowing where perfection does matter, right? Like cleanliness clearly matters there.
Yes.
That's an obvious one.
Yeah,
But like
totally.
and where imperfection is authentic and makes it more approachable.
Yeah.
I personally struggle with that because we're a new build, right? And that was my biggest, I talk about this all the time. That was my biggest like hesitation about a new build, was like, wait, it won't feel like a cabin. And in some ways it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, you know? And so picking pine floors that will get beat up by dogs. But I find that beautiful and imperfect, and like messages left behind
Yeah.
from all the creatures that have enjoyed it. But do
Yeah.
guests find that way? Or does it feel
Right.
used to
Right.
them? Like, I don't know which are
Yeah.
the right
You have
ones.
to pick your spots, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of your spots. Are there any other examples of places where you intentionally picked to leave it the way that it was, or slightly less perfect because it gives character to it?
Yeah, I mean, the birch cottage is really the best example because it did have a lot of like the original woodworking. And these cabins that we have they were all built in like the 1950s as fishing cabins.
Yeah.
And so they were like super bare bones. There were a lot of elements where you're like, okay, we got to get this up to speed, or like change this to make it a modern livable space. But I loved that the birch cottage had so many of those like old woodwork elements. I mean, there's so many, like the ceilings, and even like old light fixtures, like I kept an old
Yeah.
light fixture in our screened in porch in the birch cottage. Each one of the three that we have are in the same community, and so there's like a lot of elements of that community too, and like how it feels, that are yeah, they're just old school, and
Yeah.
I kind of love it. It's like a little bit quirky, even like people don't totally know what they're getting into until they get there. I try to like explain it as best I can, but when they're there, people are like, oh, this is so idyllic. Like it feels like you're at a summer camp.
Yes.
And that vintage nostalgic vibe, I think, is so cool for people because it's so different. It's like such a departure from your regular life.
Yeah.
We live such isolated lives that like the fact that it's part of a community, I think, does lend itself to people almost like going back to their like summer childhood dreams and thinking about like what is that idyllic summer camp vibe that
Yeah.
they want.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying. I do think there's something regional about cabin culture, and that you can't take like this perfect cabin you see on Instagram and plop it into any community and have it feel
Yes.
right. It will look beautiful. But in certain regions, there are expectations. If I'm going to a cabin in this region, there is a
Yes.
certain feel that I want.
Yeah, like lake life, I think has its own, especially Michigan lake life, or even Midwest lake life has its own vibe. And so I love that on your podcast, you're like exploring these different like subsets of a culture, because there's like subcultures to a culture.
Right.
And Michigan has its own lake life vibe. And I think it was fun for me to step into that because I grew up in Michigan. I know like Michigan lake life, but Torch Lake was new to me. And so even the vibe of a specific lake
Yes.
is really
Yes.
fascinating to me. And it has, like its upsides and downsides, but
Yep.
it has a unique feel,
Yeah.
and it draws unique, like a certain type of person, even, which I find fascinating. Like coming from a marketing and business background, I'm like, so into the target market and the demographics,
Yeah.
and who's your niche. And it was so interesting to me that like we were drawing, not to say like everyone's the same, but like definitely I could pick out like the people that would want to come to our
Yeah.
cabin. And part of that's because we, cater to families and try to accommodate families, especially. But yeah, it's just so fun. It's fun to see how it like has unfolded, I think, in a lot of ways for us. It hasn't been my like full-time job, but it's been, because we have three young kids. And so it was interesting to see the way it unfolded for us, even as I was like, kind of just like doing it on the side. And I was like, where's this going to go?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it turned into it almost like, it's almost like it grew into itself. Like it became its own thing. Like water camp in a lot of ways, I think, like I talked in my little survey with you too, before doing this podcast, about like how there was a sense for me of like, is this legitimate? And is this like the real deal? And for so long, like when we first got into this, I was almost like afraid to talk about it, Like I didn't even like tell friends and family. I don't know why. It was almost like I was trying it on for size. And then as it's grown, like now we're like 4 or 5 years in. And as it's grown, I've become more comfortable with like what it is. It almost like took on a life of its own. So that's
Yeah.
been cool to like guide that a little bit and see like, okay, where is this going? How is it unfolding? Where do I want to guide it? And how do I want to grow it?
When did you
But in a
start
lot
to
of ways,
feel
I want to keep it tight.
yeah, when did you start feeling comfortable talking about it? When did that change for you? Was there an event that made it change? Was it just time?
I think it was just time. It was probably once we added the birch cottage and then the blue spruce too. Um, it started to feel like, oh wow, this is like a collection. Like this has its own life. Like when we just had the cedar cottage for 1 year, it was like, okay, like is this? I don't know. There was a lot of uncertainty in life even at that point with it
Yeah.
being COVID. And
Yeah.
then like the following year, I'm like, no, this is like a great business. And so I was able to recognize just like the feasibility of the business piece. And then, yeah, thinking about the brand too, I think that's when it kind of started to come to life a little bit for me. I worked with a brand designer and web designer, and that process for me was really transformative because it really helped me put my finger on like what makes us different, what makes us
Yes.
unique,
Yes.
who do we want to be, where do we fit within this broad landscape? Do we want to be the upper echelon, like the high design, super luxury cabin, or do we want to be somewhere a little bit more attainable for people? Do we want to cater to families or couples?
Yeah.
Who's coming? Like, what are their reviews saying? Who are our competitors? So there was a lot in that process that my web designer, she's awesome. Her name's Kylie Buss, and she's up in Traverse City. And she has a really great process to just draw that out. And so that was a helpful process for me to really think through like, who are we and
Yeah.
who do I want this or what do I want this to represent?
Yeah. I think marketing is hard for a lot of people, but specifically women, because it's often not reinforced that we should be overly confident about the things that we're doing, right? Like humility is rewarded more than extreme
Mm-hmm.
confidence, and marketing requires a level of confidence for you to say out loud, "Hey, come stay at this place. It's amazing. You
Yes.
will enjoy it because." And so I see a lot of myself included shy away from marketing when I first started because of that. I don't want to put it out there and like brag about it. And
Yeah.
that's what
It feels a
marketing
little bit like
requires.
tooting your own horn. Yeah. And I think there's like a difference between tooting your own horn and just freely and openly sharing who you are and
That's right.
not being like ashamed of that or like, oh, this is weird. I
That's right.
also struggled with like this idea that there's so many others out there. And I'm like, why does the world need another short term rental? Like, so many people are doing it really well, even
Yes.
like right around us in our area. And so I struggled with that concept. And then once we like got some traction, I'm like, no, like we do have a unique lane here. Like run in your lane, be who you are, and even like add something new to the pie, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like add something new, add your own flavor. And I think like that's been a really neat and satisfying thing to see for me, that we can add something to this story. We can add something to this landscape of short-term rentals and cabins and what does up north look like
Yeah.
to travelers today.
Yeah. And I think we tend to be in the Instagram world of seeing all the other cabins, right? So you probably are more aware of all the cabins in your area and like, oh, do we need one
Mm-hmm.
more? Whereas we forget that a lot of the travelers who come to stay at our cabin, they're not following all of them. They don't know about them. You might be the first
Right.
one that they're finding. And it's hard
Right.
to shift your mindset and be like, I'm talking to the folks who aren't deep in this space. They might not even know that these options exist for them. I need to expose them to that.
Yes, totally. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah. It's so fun too. And I love like the guest connections that we've been able to make. And I don't know, I find that really, really satisfying as well. And that's kind of what's kept me going, is just the fact that I want to provide great experiences for people. And so that's been like my through line through the past 4 or 5 years, is just I love getting away and going to a cabin. I love lakes. I love being outside. I love it personally.
Yeah.
And so to extend that almost as like a gift to people, like, yes,
Mm.
they're paying guests, they're paying me, but that's been like a through line for me, is how do I create just the best experience possible.
Yeah. And I can imagine that process of going through your brand identity helped to do that. For someone who maybe has not even considered that as an option, can you share as much as you feel comfortable about what that process looked like and what it pushed you to reflect on and do?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I waited to do our brand. Like we didn't have a brand really before that. And I then I got on social media and I was like, okay, and I did it a little bit myself. We still didn't have like a brand identity at all. We had a name, but we didn't have a brand identity. And we were, I think it was 3 years in, and I was like, okay, I'm ready. Like I'm ready to spend a chunk of change and some time on this. Like during our off season, it's a little more quiet for us. And so I had some time to invest in that. And it was a cool process because she had all these like, yeah, she had this whole like pre-work thing that I'm kind of an overachiever and just like did tons and tons of like research and all this stuff on it and like just wrote pages and pages. It was like a journaling exercise basically. She was like, wow, you went way above and beyond here.
The more you put in, the more you
But
get out.
yeah, and honestly, like like making a map of the competitive landscape was super helpful to me to see, okay, like not only where do we fit price wise, but also like what is the look and feel that we're appealing to? Like when people go on Airbnb or they go on Instagram, like who are we likely to attract?
Yeah.
Like who's our ideal guest? And so doing some work around, yeah, your guest avatar and ideal guest, doing competitive landscape analysis, and then the aesthetic aspect of it was really fun. I love art and I love aesthetics and brand identity, color, font. And so we like worked through a couple of concepts, landed on a concept. And I really wanted that nostalgic vintage feel. And so that gave us a lot of direction there. And then I came across, this was actually a cool part of the process. I came across these old photos that had been restored by my father-in-law. My mother-in-law grew up going to Torch Lake. And so she had all these old photos from like way back when of them sailing on the lake and on the dock. And it was her with her sisters on the beach. And my father-in-law restored them and we used some of them on our website. They're so special to me. And they captured like exactly what I was trying to capture in our brand.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like it was just meant to be, like the fact that he restored those and that we were able to use them as part of our branding and web design process, it just all fell into place.
Yeah.
And the pennant flags and
Yes.
like the little
Yes.
vintage stripes, and
Yes.
there's just so many parts of that. Like that was such a highlight for me in terms of not only legitimizing our business, but like bringing to life in color what this brand means to me and like what cabin culture essentially means to me, what our experience is, what we want it to feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then once you have this clarity around who you are and who you're serving, how do you turn that into action? How did that impact your marketing efforts and what you were putting out on Instagram or in email? What did that look like kind of more tangibly when it came to your marketing?
Yeah, totally. I think it just like added color and vibrancy to the experience because we were able to create some really cool collateral pieces. We created some really cool branded welcome gifts, and I partnered with a gal who does like branded gifts, and she's been awesome. Her name's Emma Joe, and she's based out of Holland, which is like near where we live. And so working with her to create these really cool branded gifts and then some collateral pieces that we use, like a welcome guide in our cabin that was all branded. And like you don't want to go too far. It's funny because I was listening to another interview that even you, I think you were like, I don't want to have too many branded pieces because you don't want it to feel too polished. But you also want it to feel cohesive.
Yeah.
So for us, like there is a family of cabins, they're all near each other, they all have kind of a cohesive identity. And so it was fun to kind of sprinkle in some different aspects of like the collateral, like tangible things. But I think also it really breathed life into our social media presence and gave it a little bit more of a cohesive story and a cohesive identity. Like people think of that vintage, nostalgic summer camp, being on the water, just like the childhood, the wonder and freedom of childhood.
Yes.
And so it breathed that feel into all of our communications. And I did start some email stuff. It's tricky because like all three of our kids are home in the summer and that's like the busiest time, but I try to use like our quiet months to work on some of the marketing things behind the scenes.
That's smart.
And so that's been fun to just do like at my own pace.
Yeah.
Like I'm not like this mogul that's like going crazy, but I feel like I've been able to put into place like the key elements that I wanted to in our messaging, like guest communications and messaging, email, direct booking, social media, branding. So yeah, it kind of has all fallen into place. Like it definitely takes work and time. And I don't feel like I haven't like shortchanged myself, but sometimes I wonder like, should I do more? Like, am I doing enough?
Always, always.
And yeah, like there's always more I could be doing, but I also have enjoyed just the pace at which I've done it, which has been like a little bit slow and steady, like to just
Yeah.
kind of build on what we've created. And I'm really proud of what we've created at this point. Like it's so fun to be able to share it um, kind of unapologetically with people and to put it out into the world.
Yeah, yeah. So you actually have a degree in business, which I think is unusual for owners of short-term rentals occasionally, but a lot of folks don't get into it because they're like, I want to start a business. They get into it for other
Yeah,
reasons. If you could
yeah.
teach new hosts like one thing about business before they start, what would that be?
Oh man, that's a great question. I really think it is important to be on top of like your finances. I think I don't know. People have like they get this narrative that like you're just going to make buco bucks getting into this line of work. And yes, it is a great long-term investment. Like there's no arguing that. And there's tax benefits also. However, like your cash flow and how you manage things like day to day, month to month, year to year does matter too. And I think that doesn't often get the spotlight. Like if you don't have a lot of time to do your bookkeeping, or if you're not like super attuned to your expenses and even your profitability and your margins, if you're not paying attention to that, like it can get out of hand really quick. And so I would
Yes.
encourage people to maybe get in touch with a bookkeeper or someone who could give advice on their finances, or else just try to learn and keep tabs on that yourself and push yourself to be disciplined, because honestly you just have to like write it out and look at like what is the
Yes.
profitability of this property and how could we improve the profitability, like what's the seasonality,
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
all these elements of finance that I think I don't know. People definitely like try to learn that stuff, but it takes kind of a discipline to really keep on top of it and
Yeah.
to make it a profitable, cash flowing entity right now. Like
Yeah.
the long term will play itself out. The property will most likely appreciate in value. You're going to put value into it because you're improving things, and that's great. But what about day to day? And
Yes.
so that's kind of been a little bit of a struggle for me, because I'm like, this does require, like, this is a job, this is work. But yeah, I'm not like paying myself. I'm not like bringing home like a huge income. Like,
Right.
yeah, there is income and there's benefit to your family and all this stuff, but I don't know what I expected. We knew it would be a great investment, and so that was our plan originally. It was like, okay, there's great interest rates. Like this is going to be a great investment. We can use it as a family, and we want to serve our guests too as a way to make this like a cash flowing entity going forward. So it's definitely worked out, but the finance piece of it is always like on my mind. I'm like, how's our cash flow?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what are we doing? So
That's such good
yeah.
advice, because I feel like so many people, myself included, when I got into this was like, well, I can afford to buy a cabin now if I rent it, and paid zero attention to finances. I just kept looking at that account and I was like, well, there's still money in it. We're good. And
Yep.
and that
Yeah.
worked for one property for a little bit, but like once I started taking it more seriously as a business and doing monthly profit expenses, like
Yes.
how are we doing? It changed
How
the
are we
way
doing?
that I thought about it. I think
Yeah.
that's such good
Oh,
advice.
for sure. Yeah. And I think like I'm sort of an idealist. So even though I come from a business background, I'm like, I just want to make this the coolest possible place you
Same.
can ever imagine. And like I can get a little carried away with some of the design or some of the experiential aspects, but the business part of me kind of keeps me grounded. And I'm like, you have to really keep in check some of those wants, because it is a business and you have to be a good steward and make sure you're wisely allocating all of your resources.
Yeah.
And how do you want to grow? Like, do you want to be saving up for something else? So there's a lot that goes into that, but it's been like a journey to learn that and to be a little bit more disciplined about our expenses and
Yeah.
profitability and all that.
Same. I used to just buy whatever I wanted, and I was like, well, it's a write-off and we're doing fine and it makes the
Yeah.
experience better. And then I started paying attention and I was like, oh shit, like we're not profiting much this month.
Yeah.
What happened? And I was like, oh, you went to the LL Bean home store. That's what happened. If you're dreaming about a cabin build or are in the midst of a build, or you just bought a place and are getting ready to host for the very first time. Regardless of where you are, sometimes you just need a little help along the way. Shared experiences from someone who's been there, advice from someone who's learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That's me. Or a cheerleader as you finish up. All of these reasons are exactly why I started offering cabin consultations to our Instagram followers and friends who could use some specific one-on-one help. I can't promise to solve all your problems, but I can promise to be transparent about our build costs and process, our organization and project management systems, our favorite and least favorite tools for renting, how we market, and how we found ourselves with almost 80,000 Instagram followers and 100% occupancy in our first year of hosting at Cozy Rock. So if that sounds like it might help you, feel free to visit us at staycozycabin.com or on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and sign up for a time to chat there. But
the whole thing of like, oh, it's a write-off, but it's like, it's still an expense.
That's
like,
right. That's right.
Know?
Sean always says to me when we're at LLB, and he's like, we should get this. We can write it off like from Schitt's Creek. And I'm like, when he's like, you could write, and I'm like, we're still paying for it, Sean. Like,
I know.
But I will say, like, something I had to embrace over time to just, I don't know if I'm just rationalizing my spending though, is that you do have to spend money to make money. And sometimes those investments you mentioned into like nice gift bags can go a long way in elevating that experience so that someone is going to share about it, brag about it, post on social media about it, which is going to then help your business ultimately.
Yeah. Yep. And that I've been strategic about like the things that I want to put extra money and time into. And that's a perfect example. It's like from a pure business standpoint, like just a bottom line standpoint, I should not be spending money on those gift boxes. But I think they just delight the guest to that extra degree, and they bring this element of surprise, and it brings our brand into it. And so I think you just have to be strategic about where you do invest the extra money.
That's right. And in a recent podcast episode, I was talking to Spencer about Will Guidera's Unreasonable Hospitality, and we were talking about hospitality as a way of seeing people. And what I've started to think about, and he said something really smart, Spencer did, he was like, it's not about spending more, it's about spending it on the right things. So I've started to think about, we have this generic gift bag that we do for everyone, which is spending money to make them feel special. But like, how can we customize each of them for each person, which might not mean spending more, but it does mean putting more energy into figuring out who is this person, what would delight them. It does take a lot more energy to do that. I am not doing that successfully right now at all. So this is not a like, do it like me thing, but it's something I've been thinking about is how could we be more thoughtful rather than about spending money, but just being more thoughtful about how we serve individual people better.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I want to go back to the beginning because we kind of, just skimmed over like how you got into this. So can you share a little bit about how did you first get into the world of short-term rentals? How did this start?
Yeah, so my husband and I had been looking at like cottages, honestly, just for our family and cabins in like 2019, 2020. And we had been mainly focusing on Lake Michigan shoreline, which we were both familiar with. We had grown up going there and loved it and just couldn't find the right thing. I think I don't know if we put offers on anything, but we just had been looking. And I do think there's a lot of value in just looking and almost like putting yourself in the mindset of like, if I were to make an offer, what would that be? And like kind of mocking up some numbers. And we had it in the back of our mind that we would maybe rent it out, but it wasn't like a necessity. We were just kind of thinking through what would that look like to have a family cottage. And then COVID happened and everything is locked down. Like realtors couldn't even show houses. I think it was May of 2020. And I was like, I was out. I don't know. I was going for a walk or something with some friends outside, and my husband was looking on Zillow, and he filtered down of like waterfront under a certain price point, like a really low price point. And he found this place on Torch Lake. It was like one of the only ones available at that time. And it was for sale by owner. And he called the owner and they like FaceTimed that night. and like the owner showed him around the property, like on FaceTime. And John was like, this is a gem. This is a total gem. It's super small, but like would fit the bill. Like we could stick all the kids in one
Yeah.
bedroom and we could enjoy this as a family. And so I got back that night and he's like, I got to show you this. And so we looked at it
That's how
online
it
and
always
he's
starts.
like, I FaceTimed the guy. And so we drove out there the next day and it's like pouring rain, like terrible time to see it. But we fell in love. Like even in the rain, the water of Torch Lake is ridiculously blue. And so it was just like, it was like this, gleaming moment of just like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. And we could just picture ourselves there. Like there is kind of a sense of like, this is the right one. Like this is it. And
the it factor.
Because it was, the it factor. And because it was for sale by owner, that was, like created some unique opportunities too for us because we weren't using a realtor and he wasn't using a realtor. No bash on realtors, but it worked itself out and we were able to move forward. There's so much looking back that like we didn't know, but we had bought and sold a couple properties, like just of our own through the years. So it wasn't like we were completely blind to that process, but like the underwriting process and all that, because especially at that time, it was like, I mean, it still is highly regulated, but like it was just so much work to get like approved for all of that and to make the deal go through, but it went through. And that one was pretty turnkey. Like it's a older cottage, but it had been renovated. And so it was pretty turnkey and pretty easy for us. And we lived there and enjoyed it for that, like part of that summer.
Which
and then
one
we started
is it?
renting
Is that
it out.
Blue Spruce?
It's the cedar cabin.
Cedar cabin.
The cedar.
Okay.
So we started renting it because a neighbor was like, hey, like we would, we like said they wanted to rent it. And we were like, okay, let's try it. And then we like rented it to a couple friends. And we're like, oh, this seems to be a good thing.
Okay, wait. So renting it was not part of your original calculations when deciding to buy it.
It was kind of like, maybe in the future we'll do that. Let's just start out and use it ourselves.
Okay.
So we had like set aside a reserve fund of like, here's our runway. If we just want to use it for a year or two and then sell it, we could.
Okay.
But if we want to like kind of keep it and have it cash flow, like, then we're going to have to start renting it.
Yep.
So definitely was like an option. It wasn't like, oh, we just stumbled upon renting it, but it wasn't a necessity for us like right away.
Okay.
But then we started renting it to some family and friends because we're like, we live 2 hours away and we didn't want to be up there all the time. Our kids have a lot of summer activities and sports and stuff. And we just wanted to be, at home most of the time. And so we started renting it and then we got on Airbnb and then it was like a huge demand. And 2020, like after COVID, like things just like skyrocketed. So next summer, the demand was just like through the roof, booked out for all the weeks that I didn't block off. And then even like strong demand in the spring and fall too. And then that next summer, so this is kind of a fun story too, because like right across the street, or like it's not even a street, it's like right across the lane, I guess you could say, from the cedar cabin is the birch cottage. And at the time, the owner of that cottage was just they couldn't get up there to use it very much, and he was just ready to sell it. So we kind of put a bug in his ear during the winter, and we were like, hey, like could we try to buy this from you off market? And tried to like convince him, of the benefit of doing like not listing it with a realtor and all that. And he kind of like he was open to it, but then he decided to list it for 2 weeks. And we're like, if you don't get any bites, like let us know, we'd still love to buy it. And he didn't really get any bites.
Really?
Partly because
beautiful.
The pictures were really awful.
Yeah.
And people couldn't get a sense for like how it was situated.
Yeah.
And so I'm like really thankful looking back, because I'm like, yeah, if anyone like would have seen this in the setting, like in person or even like in good pictures, they totally would have been all over it. But he took it off the market after 2 weeks and sold it to us. Lots of ups and downs through that journey of underwriting and financing and all that. But we were able to make it work again through like a conventional loan with a pretty low interest rate, because that was 2021. So interest rates were quite low then.
They really were.
I think it was like 4%.
Yep.
And so we felt like we had just won the lottery, because we knew the potential of this place. Like it was so run down and everything needed to be updated. Roofing, siding, gutters, paint inside, flooring inside, new bathroom. And we did it in 3 weeks. Like looking back, I'm like, we are slightly insane, We are insane because we did that in 3 weeks. My
How?
husband was up there and we had young kids. Like my husband was like, so he's in the building products industry and he was like sort of being the general. Like he doesn't have his builder's license or didn't at that point, and he just found people. He was like, hey, you from Grand Rapids, like you do tile, like can I send, like he was sleeping in the house like with random like a tile guy and a floor guy. Like they were just like making it happen. And I was ordering all sorts of furniture, and we just like I was sourcing, you know, trying to pick paint colors and all this crazy stuff with 3 kids at home. I'm like, what are we doing? But it worked itself out,
It
and
looks
it
great.
it came together. And like it's been a process of like refining it, because at that point it's like we just got it on the market. Like we got on Airbnb of July 2021, and because the demand was so high, and we're like, summer is everything
Yep.
here,
Yep.
and so you're going to make like 70% of your revenue in those 3 months. Really, like in eight weeks or even 6 weeks of the summer, you make like over half your revenue.
That's how Maine
And
is.
so,
Yeah. Our lake
yeah,
house in
it's
Maine is
similar.
the same way.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So we just got it on the market right after 4th of July, and it was, yeah, it was great. Everyone loved it. And like the setting there is just really unique because it's so close to the water. And the cedar cabin is just like steps away. Like it's also right by the water, but a little further back. And then later that same year, my parents actually bought the blue spruce, and
Okay.
they wanted to kind of update it and refresh it from a furnishing standpoint, and then get that rented. So that's part, like kind of what completed the family of 3. And they're all like right by each other. So it's kind of cool because our own family goes up there every year and uses all 3. And so like we, from the beginning, like that's been a big piece of the journey, is, or the value of doing this, is to be able to use it personally, and then
Yep.
also to create amazing guest experiences. And then the third piece is to be able to like give it to people and just bless other people by being able to use it. And so from the beginning, we're like, if we can hit all 3 of those buckets, like personal use, guest experience, and to be able to give it to people and just let them use it for free, then we are, you know, like checking all the boxes, so to speak.
Can I ask you a little bit more about the third one? Because I've played around with this one too. And every time I talk about it, I get a ton of questions. So the first time we had an opening on our calendar that we hadn't booked, I was like, okay, I want to be able to give this away. And so I tried one way of doing that. And some parts about it worked, some parts about it didn't work. But that's when tons of people were like, I'd like to do this. How do you navigate that? Because it's, yeah, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Are you talking about like giveaways, like doing a marketing giveaway, or are you talking about
No,
like letting people use it just
letting
for
people
free?
use it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like from the beginning we've just had the desire to be able to find people that might benefit like in a special way from having that time away, who might not be in a position where they can
Yeah.
pay for a trip, because it's not cheap,
That's
and
right.
I recognize that. And so I feel like it's opened my eyes, like from the very beginning, and for my husband, like the people we interact with day to day, just trying to like feel out, like, is this something that they could benefit from, is this something that they might really need, and to just like offer it. And
Okay.
so it's not like we're offering it to, you know, everyone. And I, you know, sometimes feel bad about that, because I'm like, I would love to just share it with the whole world for free. But yeah, like I would say maybe setting like a boundary for yourself of like, at this point our business can sustain giving it away 3 times per year,
Yeah.
or 2 times, whatever it might be. And for us each year, that ability to give and bless people has grown as the business has become more stable. So I try to push myself to like ask that question and evaluate, like from a financial feasibility standpoint, like what can we handle this year?
Yeah.
And then I make an effort like every quarter to find someone to reach out to and be like, hey, would you guys like to use it? And like I said, like in the beginning, things are very unstable, things are very uncertain. And so we weren't able to do that nearly as much. But as things have stabilized and gotten more streamlined and a little more predictable for
Yeah.
me, I've
That's
been able to do that more and feel good about it. So like you kind of have to ask yourself what you feel comfortable with, but also like challenge yourself to yeah, to go a little further. And it totally depends on your financial situation, like whether this is like your job and you need the income
right.
like to support your family, or if this is sort of on the side of, you know, maybe you or your partner have have full-time income. So there's so many elements, but for us, it's been a cool thing to see that grow on the side. And like I said, like I'm not currently like taking a paycheck from this. So we see it kind of as this like self-sustaining thing. I'm like, if we can cash flow and still be able to give it away year to year, like I know over time, like we're building equity, we have tax benefits, all this. So yeah, just trying to piece it together.
So you have done it with people in your everyday life, people that you know, you've just offered it. Okay.
People that we know. Yeah. And like we've done some marketing giveaways, and I kind of put that in a different bucket.
Same.
I'm like, the purpose of that is just for growing your business.
That's right. It's not an act of generosity. As much as I love that someone gets a free stay, I'm not going to pretend like it's not.
Once in a while we've like put it into like an auction for a cause that we, care about. And so that's been a cool, like another avenue kind of within that same realm of like doing it as part of an auction.
That's been hard. I've done that a couple times too, and that has not worked well for me. So I'm not doing that anymore either. Yeah, because I mean,
what was wrong?
It's fair enough. They feel like they've paid, right? Because they have paid. They donated to the cause. So they are a paying guest. But they're not a paying guest to you. And so what I found happened a lot was they were some of our neediest guests and often wanted to like change dates a lot. Like, oh, this one doesn't work anymore. I'd like to change dates, which doesn't work for our business model. But understandably, they've paid for it and they want it to work for them. But there's this third middleman who gets the money. And it's a good middleman, right? Because it's a good cause. I found it logistically very challenging. And it built up a little bit of resentment over the difficulty of it that I don't like that feeling. So I'm like, okay, this is not working.
Yeah, there's other ways. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so we did one giveaway where it was just like nominate someone who you feel like is deserving. That can be yourself. Because we don't live in Maine and we're so far away, people in our everyday life, it would require a plane ticket to go there. So that feels like it's not actually that much of a gift if it costs you a lot of money to get there. Yeah. And so I've struggled. Yeah, some pieces of the giveaway worked and some didn't. And I wish we could figure out a better way to do it.
I know. For us, it's like doable because like I said, we live about 2 hours away. And so people in our community here in Grand Rapids are able to use it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So yeah. But it's good to like, it's been helpful for me to think about those pillars of like, what is, what's important to me? What are my values here? And for sure, guest experience is always like paramount. And then also family use. Like I do see a lot of value in that. And sometimes I'm foregoing profit in order to like block off days for our family. And other times I'm not, I'm just using it when it's vacant. And then that third bucket of like, just kind of keeping your eyes open for how can you use this and I think overall that makes it more worth it. Like just from a selfish standpoint, like the amount of work and effort that it requires, it feels more worth it if I'm checking all those boxes and thinking through what do I value?
I like the intentionality of that because I think sometimes if we don't step back and identify what are the things that are going to bring me joy from running this business, it's easy for other people to determine how your business runs. Yeah. And when you've identified that, it's easier to set boundaries and proactively create things that do bring you that joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like ultimately, I was just reading this book, Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. And it talks about how talent is one thing, but character is your capacity to hold true to your values when things get hard. So it's like we can talk till we're blue in the face about how to run an Airbnb, but if you're not doing it in a way that aligns with your values, I think ultimately you're going to burn out or you're going to just kind of not feel fulfilled through it. So like having that character piece and that value piece is so important. And I love how I actually would highly recommend that book, Hidden Potential. Okay. There's just a lot that was in there, even in the first few chapters of how to remain true to your values and character.
I love that so much because I think regularly about the voices in this space and what they're talking about. And none of them are wrong, right? They're all just different perspectives, but a lot of them are very much like money, growth, scaling, things like that. And there are less of them that are like impact, integrity,
Yeah.
like those pieces to it. And it's like, but I
Yes.
talk to so many hosts like you who think about that regularly, but those aren't the
Yeah.
dominant voices you're
It's
hearing.
just it's just not dominant in kind of the media aspect of it. Yeah, that was a really interesting aspect of a mentorship program I did last year, which was another cool way to like invest in this business, was to sign up for this mentorship program that I did with Carrie Dreyer. And she runs Roost North rentals in Traverse City, and she's amazing.
I reached out to her
Have you had her?
no, but
Yeah.
I have already sent her a
Okay.
message because you recommended her. So
Yeah.
hopefully, guys,
She's
will hear from
awesome,
her next.
and she did a really good job of cultivating that perspective and giving voice to that perspective of how do I do this with integrity,
Yeah.
and how do I do this in a way that aligns with my values. Yes, growth is awesome, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
And she never like, because we've toyed with the idea of building across the street on these properties on a lot that we own. And she definitely gave me a lot of insight because they have built some properties also in Traverse City area. She gave me a lot of insight, but she never was like pushing me to do that before I felt ready.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've asked myself, like, what's the right pace? And you have to think through like your family life too. Like we have
Yes.
3 young kids that are so busy right now, and my husband's starting a new business, and I think you just have to take it year by year. And it's been cool to see how things have fallen into place. Like it was fun for me, and just this exercise of doing this podcast, even to look back and realize like, oh, I started, and I didn't share this earlier, but I had started a master's program, excuse me. And I was like partway through it in 2020 when this all started. And I was able to recognize as Water Camp was growing, oh, this master's program is really important and great, but I'm going to pivot and I'm going to do this now because this is going to serve my family and my be a better fit for my goals right now. And so kind of just along those lines, it's like when you remain true to your values, it helps you make those pivots and not feel bad about it.
Yes.
Like a couple of people were like, "Oh, are you going to feel terrible that you never finished that program?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I like to finish things, but I don't feel ill at ease about that. I feel good about that because I was making a pivot that aligned with my values."
That's right.
And so I think that's really important. Just yeah, like in this environment of so much noise at us, so much
Yes.
clutter in our brains, I think you just kind of have to like get quiet and think through like what do I want right
Yes.
now for my life and for my family.
Yes. And to be clear, that is just as hard as building, growing, and scaling, I think. Saying no to those things that are convincing us every step of the way that if you're good at this, then it's going to be bigger and more in the next project. Saying no to
Yes.
that and choosing the things that matter to your family, to you, to your communities, to the environment, like choosing that is very hard. And I don't think we give that
Yeah.
enough credit because it's so much quieter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's harder to like, write a formula for. So I get
That's
why
right.
people don't talk about it quite as much because it's so individual. Like no one has the same set of circumstances that I have
That's right.
currently or had back then. So I get why people don't talk about that. And I'm all about growth too in business, but like it's just been interesting how we've tried to balance that. And even like the stresses that come along, like there's 5 days a year where I'm stressed out of my mind for something broke, or I have
Yep.
an awful guest, and my husband and I, every single time that happens, we're like, should we sell the cabins?
Same.
Like
Same.
every single time without fail, we're like, we got to sell these. This is not worth it.
Yeah.
But then like the other 360 days a year, we're so thankful that we get this opportunity, and it truly is a privilege and something that I don't take lightly at all.
Yeah. I think about, do you know Young House Love? Sherry and John.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were like for those who don't know, they were one of like the original, in my opinion, home renovation bloggers back in, I think I started following them in like 2007. And they had this blog that then became super successful. They sold one house, bought another one. Then they had a podcast. Then they had lighting lines. Then they bought one short-term rental at a beach. Then they bought another one. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they sold all the rentals in their house and moved into a small house in Florida, quit their blog, quit their podcast, took on full-time jobs, and just disappeared. And I think at the time, I remember being like, you are crazy. You are at the height of your success. What are you doing? And now at 40, I deeply understand and respect what they did.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it is so interesting. Like I'm turning 35 this month and my husband's turning 36. And as we get older, like that resonates so much. I'm like,
Yes.
what can we get out of our lives? You know,
Yes,
like how can we
same.
simplify? But it's funny because there's still this desire to create and grow and do new things. But then there's also this like burning desire to just simplify and get things out of your life.
That's right.
So it's like, how do you manage that? Like, because you are growing in your abilities. Like, as you get older, it's like you have experience to draw from, you have interests and talents, and you have passions that
That's
you
right.
want to fulfill, but yet you need to like have the discernment to know when to just shut it down.
Yes.
And so we do wrestle with that a lot because I love water camp so much, but I also know that it's there's parts of it that aren't necessarily my favorite, and at what point does it cross the line and turn into something that's like, no, it's time to move on. But for the most part, like I said, it's like 5 days a year. And those things are part of any job. That's the
That's
thing.
right.
I remind myself, I'm like, any job, any work you do is going to encounter really, really tough
Yeah.
things and seasons or days that you're just like, I'm done. I'm gonna
Yeah.
quit.
But it's still worth asking that question regularly. I think you've given us like two good pieces of homework so far. The first one was to think really intentionally about what your values are and how do you like build that into what you're doing every day and the choices that you make. And now this one to just think, and I think they're related, right? Because this one goes back to your
Hmm.
values as a human. What do you want
Yeah.
your day to day to look like? And really making hard choices about that. Okay, I want to close by talking about, you mentioned that you have three keywords that you didn't use the word core values, but they feel kind of like core values around guest experience. And you said they
Yeah.
were rest, connection, and exploration. And so I think having core values or marketing keywords is super valuable and like a great first step. But I think the next step of like, how do you integrate this regularly into your marketing and the experience that you provide for guests is
Hmm.
often a piece that people miss. They'll like identify the keywords and then they'll stop. I mean,
Yeah.
myself included, right? And then you like hit March and you're like, what were my keywords again? And if you can't remember
Yeah.
them, then like you're not
Right.
using them enough. How do you
Yeah. It's
integrate
like
those
they're
three
just words.
words? Yeah, exactly. They're just words. How do you
Yeah.
take them from being these important words to like actual things that drive choices you make?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was just because I was actually just thinking through that, and it has evolved through the years, but the first word that came out for sure was like a non-negotiable when we were like even before we had social media, before we even had a brand identity, was this idea of rest. And I think in our culture, our day and age, everyone's always needed rest, and but it's like, what does rest mean? What does
Yeah.
that look like to you?
Yeah.
What does it mean to feel actually refreshed when you leave a vacation? And for us, that had always been the quietness of the place that we were in.
Yeah.
And so we've really worked hard to cultivate like a sense of peacefulness in
Yeah.
each of our spaces. Part of that like tangibly is like having everything you need right there
Yeah.
so that you're not having to like message the host about, hey, do you have this or that? Like just thinking through
Mm.
all of the details so that someone who's staying there actually can rest. Um,
That's such a good
but
point.
also,
Messaging the guests or messaging the host
yeah,
takes away from some like you
yeah,
want to be accessible. We are here for
like
you.
I'm all for accessibility and communication, but I love it when people like don't message me because it means that they're actually in a place where they're not on their phone or they're not
Yeah,
messaging
yeah.
me. Like I want them to get away from their day-to-day life. Like part of that is the technology. Like we do have technology in each of the cabins, but just making it a quiet place, like even like spots for conversation. Like are you
Mm.
setting up your furniture in such a way that it's conducive to conversation? And that kind of leads to the connection point, which is like connection with other guests that you're staying with, like your own family members. Because like I'm just the host, you don't need to
Yeah.
necessarily connect with me. I love to connect, so I'm like such a people person,
Yeah.
huge extrovert, and I love like messaging with all of our guests, and it's been so fun. But really, like, how do I make the space conducive for their connection,
Yeah.
not only to one another, but also to nature?
Yeah.
Because that kind of plays back into the rest piece. Like, when you're in nature, if you're out on the water, like, do we have the amenities that we need to be able to allow our guests to go out on the water? So, have the paddle boards, have all the things you need, the life jackets, so that people can get out on the water, even like beach towels,
Yeah.
like we provide those. So just thinking through, like, yeah, the connection between the amenities and what that allows. And then the exploration part, for me, that was fun. Like, when we built our website, trying to create like a curated local guidebook, and also in our social media, like highlighting how can you explore the area. But for us, like, the backyard is the lake. And so that is a big part of it too, is the kayaking, the paddleboarding, swimming in the water, just encouraging that really in the community too. Like, how do we make it as easy and beautiful as possible to be right there on the water, or to go hike? Like, there's some really amazing hiking trails nearby. So it all fits together. And I really don't think those words are just words. Like, it has helped me stay focused on like what matters the most in the guest experience. Cause like, I could have chosen 3 other words, and that would lead to other types of communication, other amenity choices. So it is good to get like pretty specific on that. What do you want your space and your stay to represent?
Yeah. Alison, you have given me so much to think about. I'm sure that other people will feel the same. But regardless, I am left with my wheels turning, because we don't have words like there's so much here that I feel like is really actionable. I'm so grateful that you spent time chatting with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was so fun. Such an honor.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify, or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.